Today we're talking about car crashes. If you took all the car crashes in one country, put them in one place at one time, you would have a national emergency. The number of people that are fatally injured, sustain long-term injuries, and are killed in car crashes is beyond belief. As I said in the introduction, if you took all the car crashes in one country, put them in one place at one time, you would have a national emergency. And in the United States of America, just as an example, there are 500,000 serious injuries related to car crashes and approximately 40,000 deaths every year in the United States of America. And authorities talk about the fact that the United States of America is not... their traffic safety programs it's not on par with other traffic safety programs in the world. So for those of you new to Smart Drive Tests, my name is Rick August. I was a truck driver in the 1990s. Drove for Greyhound, one of the regional bus lines in the early 2000s while I was going to university at the University of Melbourne there. Became a licensed commercial driving instructor in 1997. Earned my doctorate in legal history 2006, which is the study of policing, courts, and prisons, as most of you know. And my expertise is in policing as it relates to traffic. 2015, I started the YouTube channel and the online business. It's been wildly more successful than I could have ever imagined. And have a look at the autobiography down in the description there. Great stuff to have a look at. Accidents and Preventions. It's a podcast over at the Smart Drive Test website. If you want to know more information about traffic crashes, have a look at that. And 5 defensive driving strategies. Have a look at that video as well over there at the Smart Drive Test website. All right, so traffic crashes have been around since the days of the buggy. They've been around since the days of, the Roman Empire. We have always had traffic crashes and people running into each other. And this is an article that I wrote. Again, the link is down in the description. This was an academic article that actually I wrote called Spinning Our Wheels, the Inability of Traffic Policy to Change Driver Behavior over the course of the 20th century. And in the 20th century, more people were killed in traffic crashes than soldiers sent to war. And we're talking about the First World War, the Second World War, Korea, the Middle East, Vietnam. More people were killed, injured, and maimed in traffic crashes than soldiers killed, injured, and maimed in battle during all of the wars of the 20th century. The bicycle was one of the beginning vehicles that caused fear and trepidation on the roadways, because you have to understand that before the motor car, roadways were a public space. They were where people walked, people hung out, people talked, socialized, those types of things. And there's a great book by an academic, and I'll put the link down in the description when I remember what it is. He talks about that during the 1920s, 30s, 40s, of clearing people off the roadways and moving them to the sidewalks so that motor cars could monopolize roadways, and all of the traffic safety programs that were initiated over the 20th century. Traffic deaths, as I talked about at the beginning of the 20th century, the 3 top ways that people died were war, famine, and disease. And by the end of the 20th century, the reasons that people died were terminal illness, suicide, and traffic crashes. These are the ways that we now die in our world, and the most ways that we die. So terminal illness is heart attack, stroke, those types of things. And of course, number 2, believe it or not, is suicide. And then the third one is traffic crashes, maiming and injuring. And here you can see this was a cartoon out of the London Free Press in 1925, where the figure of war is handing the trophy for the #1 killer to the motor car. And it's interesting, in the 1920s, traffic deaths due to cars and traffic were 12 deaths per 100,000 kilometers driven. Now, it's about 1.2 deaths per 100,000 kilometers driven. So it was incredibly crazy high how many people were being killed in the 1920s due to traffic crashes. No one is immune to traffic crashes. These are just a few of the people that have died of traffic crashes. James Dean was famous for the movie Rebel Without a Cause. He was killed in 1955, and this is the speeding ticket that he received 2 hours before he was killed in a traffic crash. For our Canadian friends, Tim Horton, who opened the coffee shop and was an NHL player. famous NHL player, opened Tim Hortons the coffee shop and was killed in 1974. Princess Diana in 1997. And in a twist of irony, Paul Walker was killed in a car crash. He is famous for his starring role in the franchise movie series The Fast and the Furious, which is about illegal street racing and driving high-speed performance cars. And the irony was he was killed in 2013. So nobody is immune to traffic crashes. All right, the highest number of crashes, contrary to what the news and social media likes to tell you, that the winter time is the most dangerous time, when in fact it is actually the summer months. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's June, July, and August, and part of September are the highest crash months. If you're living in the Southern Hemisphere, it's going to be last part of December, January, February, and early March are the highest number of crashes. Most traffic crashes happen during clear weather, dry roads. The driver is sober, they're not inebriated. Single vehicle collisions cause traffic safety authorities some grief, because oftentimes we cannot pinpoint a cause for the traffic crashes. However, we do theorize that fatigue, prescription drugs, over-the-counter medications, these all cause inebriation and cause people to crash, often in combination with driving too fast for the conditions of the roadway. Excuse me. The different types of crashes: head-on crashes, T-bone crashes. These are the most fatal crashes. Head-on crashes, we have more or less eliminated these types of crashes due to safety features in the vehicle. We have a crumple zone at the front end of the vehicle. This is why now, if you see a vehicle that's been in a crash, oftentimes it looks like it's been completely demolished. The reason it looks that way is due to the fact of crumple zone. It is absorbing the energy from the vehicle, and instead of putting it through into your body, it's actually putting it through the vehicle. T-bone crashes, this is where you get exactly a T-bone crash. The front end of one car hits another vehicle on the side, usually at the door, and these are fatal because simple physics determines that there is nothing in the vehicle to protect vehicle occupants. The other piece about this is, on a T-bone crash, the energy is absorbed into your torso where your vital organs are, and oftentimes these prove fatal. Now, the most common crash in the world is rear end crashes, and this is due to the fact that people are following too close. Simple, simple, simple. People are following too close. And then finally, sideswipe crashes. And if you have a choice between any of these other types of crashes, head-on crashes, T-bone crashes, always take the sideswipe crash. You are probably going to survive a sideswipe crash with nothing more than property damage, and you're going to not sustain injury. Rural crashes. Here is the interesting part, and this is the argument that I have about speed as being cause for crashes. If speed causes crashes, why do we have twice the number of crashes in rural areas as opposed to in urban areas? So in cities, we have twice the number of crashes as we do in urban areas. Now, saying that, the crashes in the rural areas and highways and freeways and those types of things are often more fatal due to the higher increase of speed and energy in the vehicle. But the reason that these crashes are more dangerous is because someone has to find you. They have to get to you. It's a greater distance. Emergency services, GPS, this is all helped, of course. Helicopters, and most of these are single vehicle crashes, so unless somebody else comes along, if it's on a deserted road and those types of things, then people have to find you when you're in rural areas. Now, if you're along a major highway, that's not going to be an issue. However, if you're on a backcountry road or those types of things, it's going to be tough to locate you and actually get emergency services to you. Now, the top 3 reasons for crashes: failing to yield, failing to give the right of way, following too close with other traffic, and this is exactly what I talked about in terms of rear end crashes. And you can see that right here in the image with the 2 vehicles in the center lane, and the one is way too close to the one in front of it. So the mismanagement of speed and space, and then I put a question mark beside speeding. Yes, speeding is a cause of crashes. However, it's not the leading cause of crashes, and oftentimes it is actually the mismanagement of speed and space, not speeding. All right, intoxicated, the late 1960s, we'll just go back to the late 1960s when drinking, driving cultures coexisted with one another. So now we have young people who are dealing with the 4Ds at the same time: drinking, driving, dating, and distractions. And this was why the GLP, the GDL, the graduated licensing program was put into place in the late 1990s. To deal with these 4Ds that young people are dealing with at all the same time. And essentially the GDL programs, the GLPs, has been a failed government program. It has not given young drivers more experience. In fact, I would argue that it's actually giving them less experience, because now most of these people live in urban areas and they have less experience with driving, because they're not driving farm tractors or lawn tractors or riding bicycles or those types of things. So when they come to driving, they have absolutely no experience. And many of them are just getting their learner's license and then waiting 6 to 8 weeks before their test, and then they're doing their test. And they're dealing with all of these other things at the same time. So the bureaucracy, drink driving laws are changing. We've increased police powers to give roadside suspensions on the spot, same as with speeding tickets. And I would suggest that anybody who is coming into getting their driver's license have a look at the MADS contract for life. It's down in the description there, and sign that with somebody who will come and pick you up if you go to a party and are drinking and whatnot. Now, I would argue that driver education and safety programs have not reduced the number of traffic crashes on our roadways. In fact, the reduction of traffic deaths and injuries on our roadways has been due to safety features in our vehicles. And that's supposed to be a Y after safety there. Some of the safety features that have been brought into vehicles: crumple zones in the front end specifically, that have reduced the number of deaths for head-on crashes, safety glass, breakaway steering columns, safety restraints, i.e. seatbelts, and airbags. And you can see this here on the vehicle, all of the different kinds of safety features that have been brought into the vehicles that allow people to live during and after a crash. Medical advances, most of these were founded during the Vietnam War, mostly the golden hour and trauma surgery, that they now realize that if they can get somebody into the hospital and into surgery within the first hour, oftentimes they are going to sustain a car crash and they are going to live. Now, the question I have in terms of people living and recouping after a car crash is, what kind of quality of life do they have? And this is the question. So, being straight factual, is it, so for example, actually we'll talk about this afterwards, but we can talk about quality of life. What kind of quality of life do people have after having a car crash and living with those types of injuries long term? So good luck on your driver's test, and remember, pick the best answer, not necessarily the right answer. How much of a risk are you at in terms of having a traffic crash, and defensive driving strategies that you can put in place to keep yourself safe when you're driving? That's on the menu for today. Answering all your questions about passing a driver's test, becoming a safer, smarter driver, or starting a career as a truck or bus driver. And we'll definitely answer all your questions about passing a driver's test and being successful as well, keeping yourself safe and not crashing, because it's not like it is in the Hollywood films where people get into a car crash, they open the door, they get out, and they walk away. Most people do not walk away from car crashes with some sort of injury. And unfortunately, the older we get, the less resilient we are and the less able we are to bounce back from that. Now, the reason, and we know this from traffic safety information and studies and statistics, the reason that most people are not conscious of traffic crashes is because most drivers only crash once every 14 years. So if you only crash once every 14 years, it's really not something that you're going to be thinking about. And when it does happen, it's a surprise, it's a shock, and you're not ready to deal with that surprise or shock or deal with the injury that you're going to sustain. Now, the other interesting part about traffic crashes, as opposed to every other kind of accident and injury that you could sustain in your life, being bitten by sharks, jellyfish, consumed by a tornado, hit by a golf ball, all those other kinds of injuries, is that, say, for example, you got run over on a bicycle, as I have been in my lifetime or in a motorcycle crash. There's a high probability that if you get hit while you're riding a bicycle or you get hit on a motorcycle, you're probably never going to get back on a motorcycle. You're probably never going to get back on a bicycle for the remainder of your life. However, if you get into a car crash and you're injured and you go to the hospital, the first thing you do when you come out of the hospital is you get back in a car and you drive. And so psychologically, there's a very different idea and thinking around how we perceive car crashes, unlike any other form of transportation or any other thing that's of danger to us in our lifetime. And that is one of the most profound things that I think about because, as you know or may not know, I'm working on the book called The Psychology of Driving, and how we think about driving, how we think about car crashes, and how we think about speed. And the other piece about it that I'm going to talk about today is that speed is not a cause of car crashes. It's the mismanagement of space and speed that are the causes of car crashes. And the reason I'm going to talk about that is because speed is too complicated. It's two things. It's time and distance. And we're going to talk about those two things and try and pull them apart and make it simpler for you so you can keep yourself safer. Marion, if speed is 80 kilometers an hour on a 2-lane highway, is it okay to do the speed limit if you aren't comfortable traveling at the higher speeds of the rest of the traffic is going? There was a broken line. 2-lane highway. Generally it is, but as you know, Marion, I mean, the speed limit here on 97C, I believe it is, going up to Kamloops from Vernon, the speed limit is 90 kilometers an hour, and most traffic is going to be doing the traffic flow. And the traffic flow on that roadway is 100 kilometers an hour plus, usually about 110 is the traffic flow. If you're doing the posted speed limit of 80 kilometers an hour, you're going to have a long line of cars behind you. I know that for a fact. So it is okay to do 80 kilometers an hour. The problem is that you're not being safe when you're doing that because you're holding up traffic behind you. And as you just said, you're causing other traffic to pass you. Now, saying that other traffic is going to pass you regardless. You could be doing 120 kilometers an hour in a 90 kilometer an hour zone. They are still going to pass you. So, you know, as long as you're doing 90 kilometers an hour, you're doing 100 kilometers an hour, I think you're going to be just fine. However, you know, people are responsible for their own driving. And if they're going to take that risk of passing, then that's up to them. And that's not something that you should be worried about when you're driving. So yes, it's okay to do the speed limit. Everybody else is not going to be doing the speed limit, and traffic will pile up behind you. So know that. I know that's not giving you a straight answer, what you're asking me as a new driver, and you're looking to keep yourself safe. My rule of thumb for new drivers getting on the roadway and getting started is to keep up with the traffic flow because you are more predictable. The other piece about it, Marion, is that a lot of roads have passing lanes, so they can pass you at the passing lanes to keep themselves safe. So that's the other piece about that as well. My friend Sharon is here, and Jake is stationed in the Buckeye, the state of Ohio here. Mallory, some people don't know where to look when they're driving, and that is absolutely true. We're having this discussion the other day about, you know, what people are doing when they're driving. I think a lot of people believe that they get in their vehicle, they hit it and quit it, and they're not mapping and tracking other road users. And when I talk about mapping and tracking, I'm kind of talking about Terminator, right? And he's like taking in information of different scenarios. And that's what you need to be doing to have that minimum safe distance between you and other road users on the roadway. You need to be mapping and tracking all the time. And if you're in the left lane and you're not getting out there and getting past and then getting back over to the right again, you are being unpredictable. You are a left lane squatter, and that is dangerous because people are going to pass you on the right. I'm going to pass you on the right because there's nothing more annoying than doing the speed limit in the passing lane at 12:30 in the morning, because I had it happen the other night. I went to pick up Tracy at the airport, 12:30 in the morning, 2-lane highway. They're doing 80 kilometers an hour in a 90 kilometer an hour zone, sitting in the hammer lane in a cluster. And you're like, what are you doing? It's just absolutely crazy here in North America that people left lane squat. And you know, this is just not something that they do in Europe. They do not sit in the left lane and just hang out there. It is very much against their culture, and if you do it, you're going to get run over by other people, and there's going to be a significant amount of road rage, and there needs to be more road rage here. And actually, I think police need to focus on that, getting people out of that left lane and making it taboo in terms of driving culture that they do that. KPRS, you are waiting first on a 2-lane roundabout, either to enter the outer lane. If there is a big vehicle next to you and you can't see where you are as you're supposed to, you enter the roundabout as soon as the vehicle is in the inner lane enters. You don't want to be next to a big vehicle in a 2-lane roundabout. If you can time it so that you can either get behind them or get in front of them, that's going to be your better solution for navigating roundabouts. So, again, it comes back to managing space around your vehicle, either behind the vehicle or in front of the vehicle. Figure out which one you want to do. So, again, it comes back to mapping and tracking other road users, other vehicles. And if there's a big vehicle in the roundabout, you want to try not to be beside that. You either speed up and get in front of it, which is very easy to do because these larger vehicles have slow acceleration, or you use your brakes and slow down. It's the same thing as in the movies. I always see these people being chased and they're trying to get away, and they're driving and they're driving and they're driving and they're driving, and the other car is like right beside them. And I think to myself, just jam on the brakes. They'll drive right by, like Top Gun. Just jam on the brakes. They'll drive right by. And they never do that. It's just like, just slam on the brakes, turn the corner, go the other way. They'll drive right by. They never do that. And it's the same thing with, defensive driving, traffic safety. Just hit the brakes. They'll go past you. They'll carry on with their life, because social driving, the other piece that I didn't talk about, in terms of crashes and driving, is that driving is a social activity. And because we don't have professional driver training, most people will do what everybody else does and follow the herd after they get their license. They just do what everybody else does. They stop 4 inches off the bumper of the car in front of them when they stop in traffic. They follow too close. They're like 2 car lengths off the bumper in front of them, the car in front. They're hoping on a wing and a prayer that they can get their vehicle stopped. And most of the time they do. But once every 5 years, they're paying attention. They're not paying attention, or they get just slightly distracted and they're following the car too close in front. Boom, drove into the back of them. Rear end collision. And for those of you, we've talked about this in previous live streams, where you get rear-ended, soft tissue damage through your neck, your shoulders, your back, and into your through your back and into your lower back. All of this because you're jammed into the seat and you're thrown back. Now, that's why we have head restraints. They're not head restraints. Or they're not headrests, rather. They're head restraints. They're preventing you from your head snapping back and getting whiplash and soft tissue damage through your neck and shoulders. And you don't want to be rear-ended. Mallory, just wondering if it's illegal to make a U-turn on a country highway. Mallory, not as a rule, it's not illegal. There are certain places that we need to look in the handbook, because every place is slightly different. Most places you can't make at an intersection, you can't do a U-turn. However, there's places in the States where U-turns are a huge part of the driving culture. It's not part of the driving culture here in British Columbia, where I live, or across Canada, but in the United States, they'll come up to a traffic light and they'll just make a U-turn. So it's very much accepted. So it depends on where you live. So here where I live, for example, you can't make a U-turn at the crest of a hill. You can't make a U-turn at a traffic lane on a multi-lane road in an industrial area, and where signs prohibit it. So there's a number of places, but as I said, it's going to vary slightly from state to state and province to province. But as far as a country road, I don't think so there in the Maritimes, Mallory. You are most welcome. Press a lot. Hello, my friend. Yes, excellent, Marion. That's great. Yeah, if it's minimum, the head restraint should be at the top of your ears, minimum. But if you can get it right up to the top of your head, even better. And Tracy drives an Audi, and it doesn't even have head restraints. Actually, the seats of the car actually come up beyond the top of her head. So, again, it's the same thing as a head restraint. But the back of the car has head restraints on it. So make sure that you check the head restraint and that it is adjusted correctly, that at minimum it's at the top of the ears. Now, I've shot videos in the buggy and I've had people come back and say that the head restraints aren't high enough. Unfortunately, the head restraints in the buggy are just like barely at the top of my ears. But the problem with them is that that's as high as they go. They don't go any higher than that. So I deal with what I got. Z, my father just got an accident sign. Anything, have a stop sign. Claiming my father was speeding more than 25 miles an hour. Interesting. Well, if that's not the case, then your father's going to have to go to court and actually fight the ticket. So you'll have to see what happens there. T, what recommendations do you live in terms of Sage cars? Sage cars. What is a Sage car? Can somebody Google that for me and we'll let you know? So I was talking about previously about social driving and that people get their license and there is no professional driver training. There's no requirement for you to ever do a driver's test again in most places in the world. Social driving. So you are left up to the devices of the culture of driving and that you are going to do what everybody else is doing when you're driving, which puts you at a high risk of being involved in a crash. Because if you want to be a proactive driver, and I don't call it defensive driving, I have to call it defensive driving because that's the accepted language that everybody understands. Because if I start talking about being a proactive driver, people are going to go, what are you talking about, Rick? What are you talking about? What I'm talking about is people being proactive. That means that you are creating a set of circumstances where most of the time you can control the situation. Okay, you can control what happens in the driving environment and you have minimum safe distance between you and other vehicles and other road users. And as I was saying before, I disagree with the fact that every traffic safety authority in the world is saying that speed is the cause of crashes. Speed is not the cause of crashes. Mismanagement of speed is the cause of crashes. Not mapping and tracking road users when you're driving all the time is the cause of car crashes because you're following too close. You failed to notice that car pulling out from the stop sign at the four-way stop sign intersection and you weren't making preparations to give way to that other person because you can be right or you can be dead right. I got the right of way. I'm going to go. I'm not going to let that person merge out onto the highway. Now you just caused a crash. Okay, whereas you could have just either sped up a little bit or you could have slowed down a little bit and let that other person merge in front of you or merge in behind you. T, safety cars in the U.S. Any recommendations? Okay, thank you for clarifying that in terms of Sage. Okay, so safety cars. All cars are safety rated now, and if you want to do that, you go on the Interstate and Highway Safety Association. It's the highway, it's the recommendation. They're the people who do the safety tests in the United States. Just about any vehicle you buy now is going to have a good safety rating. Okay, Volvo led the way. You want to buy a Volvo, they are high-end safety cars. Now, all cars are going to have airbags. All cars are going to have seatbelts. Those are going to keep you safe. Collapsible steering columns, and the reason I mention that, and you probably never even give that a thought, that if you're in a crash, the steering wheel is actually going to break away. And the reason that it used to do that is because Ralph Nader wrote a book called escaping me, but anyway, the Chevrolet Corvair was the vehicle that he went after. What happened was that the safety column, the steering column wouldn't break in a traffic crash. It would be forced into the occupant cabin, the cabin of the vehicle. It would oftentimes catch the driver underneath the chin and then break their neck in a crash. So in even minor crashes, people died in these early traffic crashes. And it wasn't just the Chevrolet Corvair. It was every vehicle out there that was being manufactured. You have to understand that there was a huge battle that went on in the 1960s, you know, in conjunction with every other battle that was going on in the 1960s, the civil rights movement, you know, environmentalism, women's rights, all of the rest of it that went on. Dangerous at any speed. Thank you, Jake. So Ralph Nader claimed that all these cars were dangerous and there weren't any safety features, and he got enormous pushback from the auto manufacturers. And the auto manufacturers were essentially creating the same product from the late 1940s until the early 1980s. So for more than 40 years, auto manufacturers sold the same thing. Yes, there was some different chrome on them, different paint, different motors and those types of things. But the only innovation in automotive technology between the late 1940s, when they created the automatic transmission, and the early 1980s was fuel injection. Okay? So in that period, the only thing was radial tires, right? Everything else was the same. So when after Ralph Nader wrote this book, and Dangerous at Any Speed, the auto manufacturers came back and said, there's no way that safety features are going to sell. And of course, 40 years later, after the 1960s and all of this went down, the auto manufacturers were proven completely wrong, because now, as T is asking me, safety features in a car, people take consideration of safety features in the car, and they want to know which vehicle is safe. And this is why we do crash tests, to see which vehicles are safe in different kinds of crashes, what kinds of SUVs roll over, and those types of things. So now safety is a huge selling factor in vehicles, and on most vehicles, even the least expensive vehicle that you can buy is going to be fitted with airbags, seat belts, collapsible steering wheels, safety glass, all those types of things that are going to keep vehicle occupants safe in the event of a crash. So it has become a selling feature, despite what auto manufacturers said in the 1960s, that these would never sell cars. This stuff is now selling cars. So the reason, T, that I tell you to go and look at the crash tests that have been done on different vehicles, because different vehicles are going to perform differently in different types of crashes. So for example, a high-speed crash, you run into the back of a semi-truck in a front-end crash, it's going to perform differently. One vehicle is going to perform better in that situation than another vehicle will, say for example, in a T-bone crash. So you're not going to get a vehicle that's going to perform the same in a T-bone crash, a head-on collision, a rear-end collision, or a sideswipe collision. Each one of these vehicles is going to perform slightly differently. So you want to have a look at that and look at the safety readings and figure out which one is the best for your situation and what you're thinking that you're going to be potentially involved in, and what you can settle for. As well, if you're thinking a bigger vehicle, an SUV, because there are many, many people who buy bigger SUVs because they are safer in a bigger vehicle. There's absolutely no doubt about it. If you take, for example, a Ford F-150, which weighs approximately 3,500, 4,000 pounds, and put it up against a Geo Metro, which probably weighs 1,800 pounds, again, it comes back to simple physics. The higher, the one that weighs more is the one that's going to sustain less damage in the crash. That's just a matter of course. So this is something else that you're going to figure out when you're buying vehicles and you're looking at safety features. Which one is going to be safer? The smaller car or the bigger car? Which one can I afford? Can I afford the bigger SUV? Can I afford the operating costs of putting fuel in these things and insurance and those types of things, especially right now with the cost of fuel being higher than it normally is, and the cost of inflation, the cost of insurance? What experience do you have? How many years of driving do you have? Are you going to pay through the nose for insurance? So I can't, unfortunately, give you an easy answer to that question of which vehicle is the safest to buy. However, Volvo, all the higher end cars are going to be safe. The Cadillacs, the Audis, the BMWs, those types of things, they're going to keep you safe in the event of a car crash. Now, coming back to it, what I can say to you is that, lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. I'll come back to it as soon as I figure it out. Klaus, first airbags came with Mercedes S-Class around 1990. Well, maybe you replaced the front seat of your Honda. That's a possibility. Now, the interesting part about that, Klaus, is that yes, the first airbags weren't fitted on high-end vehicles until the late 1988 or late 1980s and the early 1990s. However, the interesting thing about that was the first airbags were patented and invented in the 1950s, but they weren't fitted to motor vehicles until the 1990s. It was the same thing with seatbelts. Seatbelts have been around for a long time and were adopted from aviation. They had proven in aviation that they could save lives and keep you restrained. Of course, they were used in race car driving, but even though the 1940s, they had seatbelts, safety restraints, borrowed the innovation from the aviation industry, they weren't fitted to motor cars until the late 1960s, and it didn't become law until the early 1970s. And many people resisted wearing seatbelts. It took an entire generation of drivers, and it wasn't even drivers, it was an entire generation of children growing up being strapped into the car because of laws and because of annoying buzzers and those types and warning devices in vehicles, that we did not get 96% seatbelt use until the early 1990s. And the reason for that is because it's kind of like the McDonald's marketing, where McDonald's doesn't, well, at least they didn't used to, but now they used to market to the children, because they would market to the children, you know, McDonald's, Ronald McDonald's, you know, Hamburglar and all those other things, and the kids would drag their parents into McDonald's. It was the same thing as seatbelt use. You had an entire generation of kids growing up wearing seatbelts, and then they started to nag their parents that they had to wear seatbelts when they were driving. And by the early 1990s, an entire generation later, you actually got this change in driving where most people were wearing seatbelts. Whereas my parents, there was no way they were wearing a seatbelt because there were all kinds of reasons. What happened if there was a fire? What happens if you ended up in a lake? You would drown trying to get yourself out of the vehicle and those types of things. Marion, yeah, and then the people that drive the Ford F-150s think they can drive however they like and sometimes cause crashes. And Marion, there is actually proof and statistics to validate your point about pickup truck drivers. They follow too close, they drive too fast, and they're aggressive drivers for the most part, those people that drive pickups. So know that about pickup truck drivers, that there is actually statistical evidence to support that claim that they are more aggressive than other kinds of drivers on the roadway. Traffic crashes. So what can you do to keep yourself safe? Social driving, we talked about that most people participate in social driving. They follow too close. They're too close to fixed objects and other people on the roadway. And therefore, when something happens, when something goes wrong, they're hoping that they're going to react quickly and be able to avoid the situation in front of them. The problem is that is not proactive driving, and you want to move from being reactive and reactionary to being proactive and being predictable on the roadways. Because if you can be proactive and you can map and track where other road users are, and when I say road users, other cars, kids on scooters, skaters, bicycles, those types of things, and you can map and track, and you can understand the differences in speed between your vehicle and other groups of road users on the roadway, you are going to be able to manage space on your vehicle because you are going at different speeds than other people. So for example, if you're driving in the city at 30 miles an hour, 50 kilometers an hour, and you come up on a pedestrian that's walking in the same direction of you, the speed differential between your vehicle and that pedestrian is approximately 24 miles an hour, which is about 40 kilometers an hour. Okay, I was trying to do the math in my head there. So you're going to gain on that pedestrian quite quickly, and especially if that pedestrian turns and steps out in front of you in traffic, because pedestrians will do that. They jaywalk all the time. I'm guilty of jaywalking. I mean, yes, if it's convenient to go to a crosswalk or go to the intersection, I'm going to go there, but I do jaywalk sometimes. So you need to know that. You need to be prepared for that unpredictable action when you're driving. Mallory, I agree that seatbelts save lives. I wear my seatbelt all the time in the car, and that is awesome. And yes, statistically, you are safer with a seatbelt on up to about 80 miles an hour, or not 80 miles an hour, but 50 miles an hour, 80 kilometers an hour. After that, it's the benefits of seatbelts begins to reduce. So, Marion, it's too early in the morning to do math, Rick. Yes, it is, Marion. That's probably what it is. And talking about seatbelts, funny story. So last week, I'm trying to be all environmental, and I was taking Tracy's car back to her house, which is in Winfield, which is about 25 minutes up the road. And so I thought, okay, I'll go there, get the car. So I took the car, took the bus there. And the awesome thing about British Columbia is that you can take your bicycle on the bus. They have a bike rack on the front. There's only room for 2 bicycles, but you can take your bike on the bus. The reason I say that is because when I used to do that in Victoria, there were days that there were 2 or 3 guys, two or three people at the bus stop with bicycles, and sometimes you wouldn't get on the bus with your bicycle because the bike rack was full. Anyway, here that's not an issue. So I take the bus, go to Oyama, which is about 8 kilometers from her house, get off the bus, ride my bike there, get the car, come back, and then a couple of days later I took it back. Now, taking it back, I probably didn't give myself as much time as I should have. So I get there, I'm like I'm pedaling like crazy to make the bus because the bus only runs once an hour. I get to the bus stop, I'm like 100 feet from the bus stop, maybe 200 feet. The bus is 2 minutes early. And drives up, doesn't even stop, and just carries on. Oh, I was furious. So the bus only runs once an hour. So I'm in the middle of nowhere in Oyama, and now I got to wait another hour for the bus. Well, then it's a beautiful day here. I mean, it was like somebody flipped a switch and we got summer here. It's absolutely gorgeous. Well, around the corner, there's the general store and they sell beer. So I went and got a beer and I'm sitting on the beach and I'm drinking beer. And Tracy's been away in Europe for a week. So I'm talking to her on the phone, you know, having a good time sitting on the beach. I missed the second one. So now I end up sitting in Oyama for 2.5 hours waiting for the bus. And coming back to seatbelt, here's the point of the seatbelt thing. I'm on a transit bus sitting sideways going down the road this way. Nobody on the transit bus is wearing a seatbelt. And we're bombing down the highway at 80, 90 kilometers an hour, which is 50, 55 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, one of these buses crashes, everybody on this bus would be dead. Everybody on the bus would be dead because nobody is restrained. Now, the crazy part about this is that there's been a huge controversy around putting seatbelts on buses here because it's the same thing on school buses. We don't have any seatbelts on school buses. We have up to as many as 70, 75 kids on a school bus bombing down the road, backcountry roads and those types of things, and not one of them are restrained on a seatbelt because here's the sticking point for bureaucrats who are trying to draft the legislation, draft the law about having seatbelts on buses, is it the driver's responsibility for everybody on that bus to be buckled? And how do we do that? How do we, how do we police that? How does the driver police that? And how does that work out in terms of legislation? And my idea about so many things is that it's better to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. Just put the stupid seatbelts on the buses and let the passengers figure it out. Because I'm telling you, if I'm bombing down the road at 90 kilometers an hour at 55 miles an hour on a bus with no seatbelt on, I would rather be restrained. And actually, we just had one of the e-buses here crash during the winter months here that rolled over and several people were I think there were a couple of fatalities on that bus because there weren't any seatbelts on it. So let's just put seatbelts on buses. And in Australia, they have seatbelts on buses, and it's up to the passengers on the bus. If they want to wear the seatbelts, they wear the seatbelts. It is the law, and it's on the onus of the passengers to wear seatbelts. So I think that buses should have seatbelts. Jake, your city buses have belts. I know long distance motor coaches have them now, and school buses are getting them, though school bus belts restrict occupancy for different ages. Kids, yes, because they can put, with smaller kids, they can obviously put 3 kids on one seat. So how do you do that there? And Klaus says that it's 7:45 there in Germany, and that's what we were trying to do, Klaus, is make it easier for our European audience to tune in and get some information here. So any questions, if you're watching on the replay, leave a comment down in the comment section there if you have a question or we can help you out. And check out Pass Your Driver's Test First Time Course Package, guaranteed to pass your driver's test first time over at the Smart Drive Test website. It's on sale for half price. You can pick it up for about $38 US. As a bonus, we throw in both the winter and defensive driving smart courses so that we can help you stay safe after you get your driver's license and not be involved in a traffic crash. So check that out. Links down in the description. Klaus, what? No seatbelts on school buses in Canada? No, and in North America as well, Klaus. That's pretty much widespread that there are no seatbelts in buses, transit buses, school buses. And I was thinking about all of that, as I said, bombing down the highway at 55 miles an hour, 80 kilometers an hour the other day on the transit bus that I had missed because I was sitting in Oyama for 2 hours. Motor coaches have them now, so yes, and because we've had a few crashes and people are not restrained on the buses. So this is one of the major safety features that we have in terms of crashes. And seatbelts are mostly 3 points. The other piece about your seatbelt, if you're a driver, make sure that you know that there is, on most newer cars, are all going to have an adjustment here for the height so that the seatbelt doesn't kick into your, or bite into your shoulder here and wear and tear. Klaus, you are most welcome. We're going to try this for the month of May and see how this goes, helping people out and getting started having a morning live stream and talking about traffic crashes and those types of things. So we're coming back to space management and the reason for car crashes. And one of the fundamental shifts that I believe that we need to have in terms of traffic safety and crashes is that, and there's a book right here. And this book it's called Drunk Driving, an American Dilemma. And it's a sociologist, James Jacobs, and he looks at the culture of driving and he looks at the culture of drinking and in the United States. So he looks at that and he talks about this different drink driving as a cause of car crashes. And one of the radical ideas that he proposes in this book is that 93% of people are not going to drink and drive. Not anymore, because of the grassroots issues that we've had around drink driving and those types of things. Most of the drink driving problems that we are now experiencing, having on our roadways, is caused by many people who are repeating drinking and driving over and over again. So they're just driving drunk all the time. And I would also argue, and I've had support from other people, my friend Tim over at Drive Smart BC, that we still have a drink driving problem. And one of the things that Jacobs proposes in his book on drunk driving is that we teach people how to drive drunk, which is just never going to be accepted by the status quo. And I have the same proposal is that instead of putting all of this money and all of this time and energy into saying to people, you can't drive distracted, don't drive distracted, blah, 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 blah. And actually, I'm on record from 2006, almost 20 years ago now, saying that there was no point having a social media campaign against distracted driving, because we are not going to eliminate distracted driving. We're just not going to, ever. I mean, cell phones are here to stay. Drinking in our cars all come with cup holders. Eating in our cars is just gonna happen all the time. So, distractions, eating, drinking. Okay? Distractions, eating, drinking. These are the three things that we're dealing with in terms of distractions. So what I'm talking about is, let's teach people how to drive distracted, how to drive drinking and eating. Okay? Because there are places on the roadway that you can do this as long as you're keeping space in front of your vehicle. There are times not to do this. And the company in the States that I was actually doing defensive driving for, they were talking about drinking, and they were talking about one of their drivers who, actually I don't have a cup here big enough, but he had a cup that was, you know, one of those big super mugs. It's almost a cup that's a thermos with a lid on it. And he is going through an intersection, and at the same time that he goes through the intersection, he takes the cup and he puts it in front of his face, which completely blocks any vision that he had. And of course, he was too close to the car in front of him. The car in front of him stopped in the intersection and he rear ends the car in front of him. So we are not going to get rid of distractions. So what I propose is that we teach people proactive defensive driving that will allow them to know when they can do these goofy things when they're driving, and how to create situations where it's going to be safe to allow their attention to wane from the task of driving. Because we have all kinds of periods of time when we're not paying attention to driving. Because if you're one of those people who is a proactive driver and you're driving and you're mapping and tracking other road users and other cars on the roadway and vehicles and whatnot, then you know it's like, okay, there's nobody in front of me for a half a mile, a half a kilometer, you know, I can take a quick drink and put it back down, and then I'm good to go, and my focus is back on the road. Okay? There are times to do that. So in terms of the same thing as what Jacob was talking about in terms of people teaching people how to drive drunk, we can teach people how to drive distracted, because we're not going to eliminate this problem. We can teach people how to eat and drink in their cars and keep themselves safe, or put their makeup on, or whatever else they're going to do. But they need to create driving situations that are going to allow them to do that when they're driving. And that, in my mind, if we can teach them how to manage space around their vehicles, and we can begin to focus on that, we are going to begin to reduce traffic crashes when we're driving. But if we just keep the status quo of what we're talking about now, in the fact that speeding causes crashes, distraction causes crashes, we are not improving the road situation, and the road situation is going to decline, because everything in the last decade has shown that pedestrian crashes are up, the number of pedestrian deaths is up, the amount of distraction is up, people are not paying attention when they're driving as much. So we need to focus on teaching people how to create situations so that they can drive distracted for short periods of time. Not the entire time that they're driving, obviously, but for short periods of time. That if you want to eat a sandwich while you're driving, how do you create the situation that's going to keep you safe? Okay? If you're driving through the city, for example, you're going to not be eating while you're moving through intersections or navigating intersections, because 40% of crashes happen at intersections. So there, you want to have all of your attention on moving through the intersection and keeping yourself safe. Mary and I, we usually take a drink of water. We'll stop at a traffic light. And yes, and you know, this goofiness of distraction, you can't check your phone when you're at a traffic light. Again, if the light just turned red and you just came to a stop, it's like, yeah, I can take a quick look and then turn it off and put it away. I understand that most people don't have the capacity to be able to do that, but distractions, phones, drinking, eating. Phones, drinking, eating. Those are the three distractions. Those distractions are not going to be reduced. So that's the proposal. Jake says, from an instructor standpoint, ever figured that driving instruction is too abstract? It is to pass the test, not drive properly. Course didn't teach me to drive. I had to figure it out. You're absolutely right, Jake. You're absolutely right. Unfortunately, too many driving instructors, too many driving courses are to the minimum standard of passing a driver's test. And they do not teach you how to drive and how to keep yourself safe after you get your driver's license, especially with what you're talking about in terms of a commercial driving license. This is why most driving companies, or trucking companies rather, will not hire new drivers after 6 months or till you get a year of experience, because you don't know how to drive. And the first and foremost problem of CDL driver training is, especially, it's not so much now because we're moving to automatic transmissions, but in the days of manual transmissions, crash boxes, these students were so focused on that transmission and that crash box that they were not focusing on turning. You got a big vehicle and you have to figure out where it is in space and place, and that transition from moving from a car to moving to a 75-foot vehicle is an incredible transition, and turning is not something that driving instructors focus on because they don't know how to teach it. They don't know how to teach turns in a big truck. And it's the same thing. I was watching my daughter yesterday trying to just pull a dolly, a two-wheel dolly. We were moving boxes yesterday. And I said, you got to compensate for the off-tracking, because the dolly is going to take a shorter path of travel than you are. And it's the same thing with a trailer in a big semi-truck. The trailer drives the truck, not the truck. And that's the weird thing that new drivers have to get their head around. Jake, send folks to the RCMP Driving Academy. 2 hours there is better than a year under the GDL. And you're probably right. You're absolutely probably right. Mallory, great live stream this afternoon. See you tomorrow evening. Yes, you will, Mallory. Thank you so much, my friend. Silvers, I got tunnel vision from traffic in front of me when it slows, and potholes are my worst enemy. Silvers, I think that potholes are everybody's worst enemy. So I think, just look farther down the road and try to avoid that tunnel vision. You want to keep your head moving, looking around, up, mirrors, check. instrument panel far down the road, and that way that will avoid that tunnel vision. You got to move your head. You know, if you want to observe properly, you've got to move your head. And as well, for your mapping and tracking, you have to move your head to be able to map and track correctly. And it comes down to shoulder checking, shoulder check, shoulder check, shoulder check. This is one of the skills that I suggest to people. Do not lose this skill after you get your driver's license. And I can tell you, 9 out of 10 drivers on the roadway do not shoulder check after they get their license. They never use it again, unless something happens. So for example, they merge and they get into a side swipe crash, then maybe they'll hone that skill again of shoulder checking. But otherwise, they're not going to shoulder check. And it is one of the best skills, not only to reduce fatigue and distraction, but to observe correctly and to look into the blind areas around your vehicle, because the two biggest blind areas around your vehicle are the passenger side of the vehicle and at the rear of your vehicle. And I asked this question on the weekend on one of the polls on the community tab: can you back up for more than a block? And Jake left a couple of comments there, and it was really good. You know, a lot of people can't. You put them in a car and you say, listen, back up in a straight line for more than a block. They simply can't do it because they don't have good spatial awareness of where their vehicle is on the roadway and in relationship to other vehicles and road users, pedestrians, cyclists, motorcycles, those types of things. And this is why, because they don't know where their vehicle is in relation to other things on the roadway, they get into trouble and they get into crashes. And this is why our driver training needs to go back to fundamentals. It needs to focus on slow speed maneuvers. The problem is, too many people are duped, and too many people in positions of power say slow speed maneuvers don't do anything, when in fact, slow speed maneuvers do everything. They teach people where their vehicle's in the space and place. And whenever I teach a new driver, we've got a lot of alleys and back alleyways here around where I live. I take people out and I get them to back up in a straight line for 1 or 2 blocks. So I force them to do that. Marion says, I can back up, I just can't see out the back window. Marion, if you can't see out the back window, that's fine. Use your mirrors, use your backup camera. I'm sure you have a backup camera in that Honda that you've got. So use that and just practice backing up. It is going to make you a better, safer driver overall. Elevator, you almost got hit today, but we're glad that you didn't and that you come back and easy to tell the story. Natalie, when approaching all-way stopped intersection, how do you keep track of right-of-way when there are school buses, crossing guards, kids, and impatient drivers pushing from all directions? Natalie, it's not really a matter of keeping track of right-of-way. It's just keeping track of when it is your turn. And it's very predictable. It always stops. And if you have trouble understanding that, because it is a little bit weird, right? Who's there? And often what's going to happen is that these 2 lanes of traffic are going to go, and then these 2 lanes of traffic are going to go if it's busy, as you just said. So these 2 cars are going to go, and then these 2 cars are going to go, and they're going to alternate, right, when it's busy at the all-way stop sign intersection. What I suggest to you is take 15 minutes, go down there, stand there at the all-way intersection and watch the traffic go through when it's busy, and very quickly you will understand when it's your turn. And the other piece about that, straight through traffic has the right of way over turning traffic, and then right turning traffic has the right of way over left turning traffic. And if there's 2 left turning vehicles, so if this roadway is going and both cars are turning left, right, you're going to turn left. You can turn left at the same time. Okay. Now, if you're turning right and there's another vehicle on the other side turning left, you go first and then the left turning vehicle goes. So it's really predictable. Go down and stand at the intersection for 10 or 15 minutes and you'll figure out the pattern. And once you figure that out, it's really easy, because it's not really about right of way. It's more about whose turn is it at the all-way, 4-way stop sign intersection. All right. So excellent live stream this morning. Lots of discussion about crashes and whatnot. Check out the Passenger Driver's Test First Time Course Package over at the Smart Drive Test website. If you had a driver's test in the last couple of weeks and you passed, congratulations on that. You have a driver's test coming up in the next week or so. Good luck on that. There's another live stream tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Look for that, and we'll see you there. And remember, pick the best answer, not necessarily the right answer. Have a great night. Bye now.